I'm the kind of person that has memories that look like photographs. So I just remember what he looked like when he was drinking a beer on the couch and just a big smile on his face and his little pint glass of beer. And he was a very proud, very confident man. He had a beautiful garden. One of his proudest things, I think, was his flower garden. We used to come around and he used to take us outside and feed the birds and show us all his flowers. He'd been well all his life. He was an amazing runner. He once ran the length of New Zealand for charity. We celebrated his 80th birthday as a family down in his hometown, and that was wonderful. And there he was healthy and relatively well. He did have cancer. Wasn't at that stage terminal. It might not have at that stage been what would kill him. He was diagnosed eventually with terminal cancer and congestive heart failure. In his last few weeks in particular, he said that this wasn't living and life was hell, and he was very vocal about his deterioration. It was a Friday night. He said goodnight to his wife and went off to bed. He then hoisted himself into his commode. He then had a serrated kitchen knife and he sliced an artery in his leg. He was found dead in his bed. He'd obviously bled out. He'd thought about things. He'd had his leg in a plastic bag so he wouldn't make a mess. You know, he'd waited to a Friday night, so he wasn't putting anybody out that had to have work the next day. I think it harks back to the fact that he never wanted to jeopardise anyone else, the fact that he wouldn't even speak to someone in the medical profession because he didn't want them to get in trouble or, you know, have legal things done towards them. It's clear that he'd determined that his own life wasn't worth living and he was suffering so much pain that he'd decided to take his own life.
This is a photo of Dad's first plane. He was an innovator. He and my mum retired. Dad went and got his pilot's licence, built an aeroplane, and then they flew around Australia several times. He was just a very positive, very get-on-with-it kind of guy. He was diagnosed with myelofibrosis, so his immune system became really compromised. So he had several kinds of treatments and they tried different drugs and nothing was really working. And they got to a point where he said, no more, you know, this is enough. But none of us were very happy about what we knew was coming. He'd said to us, look, I know it's brutal, but it's the only option. Not very long after that, one morning, he took his crutches and he went out to the shed and he took a gun from his safe where he kept them all locked away and he shot himself in the backyard. He felt very let down by the law as it stands, that he wasn't able to legally say, this is enough.
If he had have had the support from medical people to go out in a far more serene and peaceful way, if he had been able to take something and have people by his side,
that would have changed our family immeasurably, and it would have been dignified and it would have been gentle and it would have been a respectful passing.
Of course it's terrifying and it's sad and it's scary, but if we don't have these conversations around choice of dying and people will always have to respond in brash ways and put their family through uncomfortable situations and put themselves through more pain.
I think for something as important as death and dying, to say that it's a grey area and it doesn't really matter leaves families open to situations like what happened to our family. I know that it's had an effect on my family. I know it's had an effect on me. It just changes the way you look at the world.
knocked me over on the left-hand side.
You would have hit me if I was in your way.
You're just supposed to stop, mate.
So I
Then
do.
you're doing 45 k's an hour in the 60 zone.
And so you do 60 on the wrong side past the school. You're a clever fella.
Oh, you're amazing, mate.
Oh no, we both are, aren't we?
Good on you. Take your TV bloody camera off, you idiot.
Oh, that won't worry you.
You're the bloody idiot.
No, I know I am.
I passed you doing 60, if you don't mind.
Yeah. Well, keep on going. We may as well give it a bit of a race here, eh? So he's just been angry because he thinks I sort of giving way to him at the roundabout, yeah? I didn't see the camera, of course. He's looking there thinking, fuck, what's going on? Bloody people get agitated over such little things.
Hi, Coles Express team. Here I am again. So we're halfway through raising this $1 million for Daffodil Day, and I am hearing that we are absolutely on track. So congratulations, $1 million. You can do it. Thank you very much. Over and out. You sort of get to the back end of your life and you start to think about what really matters. This really matters to me, and I'm very proud of what everybody's been able to achieve. Coles Express is raising money for Daffodil Day, which is the Cancer Council of Australia. So 2 cents from every litre that you've just put in, Shell and Coles Express will donate to the Cancer Council. Oh, okay. And you can help by making a donation or buying a pin inside or a pen. You might look like a person that needs a pen. They're great pens, the Daffodil Day pens. Yeah. But every little bit helps. And by the end of the day, hopefully we'll make $1 million. Okay, right. Hey buddy, how are you? How's it been going?
Good.
Have you been getting lots of money?
Got lots of money.
Have you?
I have, actually.
What have people said? Is it been more than that?
No. For me yet.
Do better than that.
I'm trying.
So it's a beautiful day. You don't run into big dogs in people's cars too often that you can pat. Like usually they get a bit territorial. Yeah. I've done it a few times and nearly had my bloody head bitten off. Well, have a fantastic day. All right, thank you. And feel free to stick $1 in the kick if you want to. Will do. Righto. See ya. Do you know anyone who's had cancer?
Yep.
Everybody does, eh? The shitty part about dying is I'm not going to get to see how successful you all will become, but I can only imagine what is going to happen, which is going to be phenomenal.
Dad's a great dad. He's a great father. He's very, juvenile is the wrong word, but being an only child growing up was difficult at times, just in terms of not having a sibling and that sort of thing. And Dad very much fell into the role of being a brother as well as a dad. It'll be hard when he's gone, of course, but it'll be, losing a dad and a brother and a best friend sort of all in a hit in a way.
Peter and I, we actually went to high school together, but we didn't know each other at high school. So we met some years later after high school through a mutual friend. So we met in about 1980. We got married in 1985 when I was 28 and Mitchell was born when I was 33. We have fantastic friends and family and, fantastic support. And it's the same, people say, how do you do this or how do you cope? Well, show me an option and I'll take it,
You all look at me and think, is he really dying? Well, I am. Technically, if I believe what the doctors told me, I've got 10 weeks left. Quite clearly, I've got more than 10 weeks left. So, in fact, I went to Porsche yesterday and started talking about maybe I should buy a new sports car. I'm serious. So we've got to do some paperwork?
Yeah, come down this way.
Okay. And it's okay these guys wandering around?
Yeah, they can wander around.
Righto. Just don't scratch anything. Yeah, I'll try me.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah. So the first time I got cancer, which is back in 2008, which seems a long, long time ago. It really snuck up on me, so I went and had some tests. I had a bit of a pain in my back. The doctor comes out and he said to me, "We've just taken a couple of little samples for a test." Never even dawned on me that there was a problem. Like, it's bizarre when you look back. And then about a week later, I rang up, I got the doctor's surgery, and somehow or other something went wrong in the phone process, and I actually got the doctor. And so I said, what's the answer?
Peter was diagnosed with esophageal cancer in 2008. He was told he required extensive chemotherapy and major surgery if he was to have any chance.
What happened was essentially your stomach and esophagus are cut. They're pulled together and rejoined, and you have no real esophagus, and you're missing half your stomach, and my stomach is now settled in my chest up against my heart. I kept having to go and get checks. You just kept on facing hurdles and having to climb them. Just went on and on. And I really thought when I was in hospital I was going to die. I got home from the hospital. I had 3 more months of chemo to go, and I got back to work. So getting back to work was just a fantastic day. And really you just walk back into your life, having left it 5 or 6 months earlier. We got to 2014, life was pretty much back on track. And then suddenly I got asthma. Found out that it's returned, and the fact that it returned, there was never a dispute. Esophageal cancer, if it returns, you're dead. There's nothing they can do about it. Suddenly it dawned on me, God, it's come back. And it was just like an icicle, this great huge icicle. It just sort of cracked off, and it's just drilled you to the floor, straight through your body, and you just get this freezing cold shiver. How the hell am I going to deal with this? And then I got on the internet and I looked at ways to kill yourself, so I keyed in suicide and that sort of thing. I concluded that what I'd do is I would kill myself, and I'd go down to Bells Beach. I'd go there late at night in the car park. I'd get some hoses, attach them to the exhaust of my BMW, and I'd wrap some foil around it so that the hoses didn't melt. Take a whole mouthful of Valiums, have a bottle of Scotch and Coke. That would take care of that. And then I just decided, this is just bloody ridiculous. I've just got to face up and deal with it. I'm not going to kill myself. I am going to face up to it, and let's get on with it.
I'm dying an awful death of cancer. I've had no quality of life whatsoever. I'm in pain 24 hours a day. I don't want to go on living.
I gave Steve Guest Nembutal, which he used to end his own life way back in 2005. He had an undoubted end-of-life circumstance. He had undoubted suffering of significant degree. In palliative care, every day of the week, patients are given medications by injection that cause them to go to sleep and die. That's accepted as good medical practice and not illegal. And I thought, well, what is the difference between that and my giving Steve Guest medication that he can take by mouth and go to sleep and die? I was dealing with him. I engaged with journalists and made it known, and I used the phrase, I'd given him advice which gave him control over the end of his life. That was the catchword, which signified that I was helping him. 6 months after that, the police invited me to an interview. I felt that I had made it pretty clear that I was helping him to die, but nothing occurred. The authorities, the police, coroner's office, the DPP, government, really didn't want to deal with this issue. They really wanted it to go away. And so I thought, well, I'll throw it in their face. After legislative proposal after legislative proposal was trashed in the parliaments of Australia, I decided that Anzac Day 2014 would be when I went over the top of the trench, as it were, and launched an attack.
So are you hoping to be charged?
Part of me says yes, because I think that could give a definitive decision. Another part of me says no, I don't want the stress. If I were charged, I would be asking a jury to decide whether I'm a criminal or a good doctor. I'm not admitting that I've broken the law. I'm admitting that the law is wrong. Law can always be viewed from 2 points of view. Law is always interpreted in the court. I wasn't just putting myself up on the cross, as it were. I was saying, you convict me. I've got a good defence. And the police said they were reopening the file, and I haven't heard boo from them. And in my view, that essentially brings the law into a certain amount of disrepute.
The idea of dying with dignity, which to me means having a choice at the end of your life. Dr. Syme had been putting himself out there saying that he had broken the law in supporting a person in that way some years earlier. I reacted to that with an opinion piece in The Age, which really talked about, well, why shouldn't people have choice?
Good death, of course, means different things to different people, but for me, and I find this is acknowledged by most people I talk to, that means that you die when you determine is appropriate, where you determine is appropriate, and with whom. And there's absolutely no doubt whatsoever in my experience that the best way for that to happen is with an oral dose of Nembutal. It's an experience that is very calm, very serene, very peaceful, it's dignified, it's secure. It's an experience of great beauty and love, actually. It's bittersweet, of course, you're losing somebody you love, but there's a sweetness about it as well that means you can actually look back on it and feel warm feelings rather than bad feelings. It's a sort of unrecognised benefit of a good dying is what it leaves behind for the people who live on.
I met up with him really just to see how I could help him further in a public way the ability to have the government make this something that was a right for everybody to have.
One of the contributing factors to the reason we don't have these laws is that politicians and many in the medical profession are unaware of the scale of the damage that's been caused by the fact that we have no form of assisted dying. We have documented proof of doctors breaking the law in order to carry out what they believe is the proper medical treatment of their patients.
I found myself added to the list of doctor deaths. So I said, there's only 9 of us in Wikipedia. You can go and look it up now. 6 of them are dead, and so they're not practicing anymore. There's a South African still awaiting trial. There's a Siberian out there doing 2 life sentences. But I'm the only one on that list in Wikipedia who's still practicing. I mean, if you got worried about that sort of thing, you would never get involved in anything. I mean, people will call you names. If you're not attracting attacks, you're not doing anything. People want control of their own destiny, and the best way to do that is to make sure that they have their requests, for whatever reason, about their own lives respected.
This legislation has never passed anywhere else in the world, certainly nowhere else in Australia. Territorians would say, well, so what? We're different. We do things different. We do things first. We do things better.
The Northern Territory Act sets in place strict criteria for a person to become eligible for euthanasia. It demands that persons seeking euthanasia have a mind which is sound, but a body which is suffering from a terminal illness.
Nitschke made international news back in 1996 when assisted suicide was legal in Australia.
I was the first person under the Northern Territory law, which came in 1996, to provide a legal, lethal, voluntary injection. It was the first time in the world that had ever happened, because there hadn't been a piece of law in place prior to the Northern Territory legislation. I found myself in a position with some terminally ill patients who were desperate for a peaceful death. So in the case of Bob Dent, the first man to die, I watched as he died. He pressed the button on the machine delivered the drug which put an end to his suffering. He was going through a very, very difficult time of prostate cancer, and I was aware that this was the world's first legal, lethal, voluntary injection, and it was significant. But of course that world's first law only lasted 8 months.
It's 9:19. You're listening to 8DDD.
The Northern Territory government's expected to begin defending the voluntary euthanasia legislation from a court challenge today.
In federal parliament, Liberal backbencher Kevin Andrews has sponsored a private member's bill to overturn the Northern Territory law.
I don't think future Australians will thank us if we didn't have the courage to address this issue.
What possible right does Kevin Andrews, Leo McClay, Lindsay Tanner or Anthony Albanese have to have exercised Bob Dent's conscience for him? It was his decision and he had a right to do that.
Bob Dent died last Sunday.
We shared a meal and we shared a drink, and then he indicated that he wanted to proceed.
He used a computer hooked up to lethal chemicals to assist 4 people in Australia to take their lives when assisted suicide for a short period was legal there.
And now Australia just languishes in the dark ages.
Since 1997, more than 700 Oregonians have chosen to end their lives under the Death with Dignity Act.
This has brought an additional choice to dying patients and for whom this is a least worst alternative.
Belgium has the most liberal euthanasia law in the world. And even though this country is predominantly Roman Catholic, surveys show overwhelming support here for the right to die.
Most Dutch people see euthanasia as a fundamental right. The debate's no longer about if assisted dying should be allowed. It's about whether more people should be able to end their lives this way.
Terminally ill Montana patients and their physicians sued the state today for the right to self-administer medications that would allow them to die peacefully.
The state of Vermont now joins a small list of states that allow doctor-assisted suicide.
But lawmakers want to do more to help those with terminal illnesses.
The issue isn't whether the patient is going to die, but how.
A Colombian man has made history as the first person to legally die in his country through euthanasia.
While Colombia is the only Latin American country to legalize assisted death, the debate continues in this predominantly Roman Catholic country.
This is an issue whose time is coming, and I think soon we will see more and more states accept the right to die.
California, the latest state to allow the terminally ill to legally choose to end their lives.
Colorado overwhelmingly passed death with dignity or assisted suicide, joining California, Vermont, Washington, and Oregon.
But no country has ever launched physician-assisted suicide on the scale now underway in Canada.
It's a deeply personal issue that affects all of us in our families and all of us individually as we approach the end of our lives.
The world's moved on. There's laws available to 100 million people in 3 continents, but Australia's moved nowhere.
The doctors could be prosecuted with murder. You know, the person's family could be prosecuted. You know, we're still seeing people being investigated all the time. So after they've gone through the trauma of losing a loved one, they're then having police investigations.
Peter wants to make his statement, and how he dies will be part of that statement. If they don't want to prosecute me in relation to Steve Guest, then they may have to reconsider prosecuting me if and when Peter Short dies.
Peter's story wasn't especially different from many other people who've been in a similar situation. I've been in the position as a doctor where I've had to confront this before. I'd been working on this bill, and then I heard Peter's story, heard him talk, and thought I've got to meet him and talk to him about the bill and see how he feels about legislation and being a spokesperson for changing the law.
Peter Short, welcome.
Good morning, thank you.
Richard Di Natale, if we could go first to your Dying with Dignity bill. You want Parliament to legislate the rights of the terminally ill. Can you tell us how that would work in practice?
It would essentially mean getting access to medication that's currently used illegally by some terminal cancer patients.
You know, I want to choose to have a magnificent ending to my life because I've had a magnificent life and I don't want to drip out at the end of a morphine tube.
Peter Short, you want right to die laws to be your legacy. You are devoting your remaining months to this cause. I know you've written to the Prime Minister. Did you receive a reply?
No, I haven't received a reply from the Prime Minister. I'd like to see where the people who don't believe in this actually are residing. Maybe I'll meet some today.
I think you might. Richard Di Natale, thank you for your time.
Pleasure.
Peter Short, very best wishes.
Thank you very much.
A dying man has told a Senate inquiry in Melbourne he wants to control how and when he ends his life.
Do I drip out on a morphine tube, or do I pick a moment and with my wife and my son and my dog's ear, do I say goodbye, take an appropriate drug in an environment where the state and the country supports what I'm doing?
Peter Short.
Cancer patient Peter Short.
Peter Short. He's been campaigning, lobbying politicians on the issue of voluntary euthanasia, making a documentary. He's in the studio with me. Peter Short, how's it going?
From a health point of view, it's going fantastic, like as you said, and just getting up and treating every day is an important one. Our current goal is my son's expecting to start full-time proper work on the 1st of February, and I aim to have a glass of red with him when he comes home.
Questions?
What the bill's about is to give somebody who has a terminal illness the option to have more control at the end of their life. And what that means is seeking assistance from a physician to end their life when they want, with their family, so that they no longer are suffering. And that's effectively what this legislation does. The safeguards in this bill are similar to safeguards that are used in other jurisdictions. An individual would need to go and see a doctor and get then a second opinion from another doctor and a psychiatrist to make sure they're of sound mind. And then if they are of a mind to get assistance from a doctor in those final days when their suffering's intolerable, they can do that in the form of physician-assisted dying.
I get to do my speech, which I'm really excited about.
Yeah, it's a good speech.
Well, I've been practising it a lot. And if I leave anything out, you just jump in, eh?
I will.
Okay, and I'll jump in if you say something wrong.
Yeah, well, good on you.
I'm 57, having retired because of terminal cancer in February this year. And I was Chief Executive of Shell Coles Express in Australia, which is 630 service stations, 5,000 team members, and about $7 billion a year in turnover. And I've got to tell you, I'm amazed I'm standing here doing this, but be warned, patience is not one of my strong suits. I'm here to speak to you about the importance of ending this debate about dying with dignity. As a compassionate group of parliamentary leaders from all parties carry this well-written legislation all the way into legislation quickly.
We don't like talking about death.
No.
We really don't.
Yeah. If they talk about it, they might catch it.
Well, it is contagious, though.
Yeah.
You know, we're all going to catch it at some point.
It's about not being scared about it, so you can enjoy the rest of your life and stay in control.
Often with legislation like this, what you find is that people are in the trenches. They can become very personal, very adversarial. People do have strong views, and those views are formed on the basis of a whole lot of things: personal experience, religious views, and so on.
I don't believe in helping people to be killed. I don't believe in that. I think it's wrong. The Ten Commandments say thou shalt not kill. Why is it that there's now this pressure to legalise patient killing when we've made all these strides in palliative care, pain relief, etc., etc.?
Oh, it's pretty clear that some of the people who oppose this legislation and presented to the committee are using all the tactics devised by lobbyists who understand the sort of language that needs to be used. So, for example, calling this physician-assisted suicide, talking about killing people, all those sorts of things that really are just tactics used to scare people over an issue that I think most people understand is much more complicated than that.
A lot of people, there may be a very caring family looking after this loved one who's very ill. There's putting strain on the family, and the sick person can see that. And it would be better for my family if I got out of the way. And I think there'd be a lot of that happening too. People would feel they're a burden on society. Such a serious principle, it's such a very, very serious principle that you don't kill people and you don't legislate to kill people.
Just the standard myths that get trotted out, that this is a slippery slope. Well, again, no evidence cited to demonstrate that.
Subsequently, you'll find the category of killable people will slowly but surely increase, and we only have to look at the Netherlands for that, to see where that's happened.
I think what you sometimes find is people who have got mixed views and maybe sitting on the fence a little. It's really those people, I think, that we need to try and reach out to through the course of the debate around the issue, because it's going to be those people who decide whether this becomes a law or not.
I plead, get this done once and for all. This law will come to pass one day, and making that day start right now, you'll change the invisible face of terminal suffering and concerned dark conversations that go on needlessly as we prevaricate. You know this just as well as I do, so please face up to it.
Somebody who is going to spend their final months being a champion for this cause, that's a big thing to do. You know, most people, when faced with a similar situation, will retreat inwards, and that's understandable. But to have the strength to not just do that and to look outwards and to think about the sort of legacy you're going to leave behind, I just think it's a pretty remarkable thing. There are a lot of people privately who have expressed a view to me that they think it's long overdue. People on all sides. It's not a partisan issue. We've got a list of people who have endorsed the Dying with Dignity Charter. The question now is to actually start having a national conversation in here so that others feel safe to be able to come out and support it.
I think if you can mobilise your members to go and approach those members of Parliament who are undecided, haven't made the commitment yet, really has to come from the bottom up.
To me, though, there's a question of leadership. Yeah. So I vote for people to put them into this Crystal Palace to do stuff on behalf of Australians, and I want you all to lead the issue. The Australians are screaming at you. They want this changed. I think it's unfair to say you all go down your rat holes and start from the bottom up. You look at the track record of the people in politics in terms of their leadership skills, their business skills, their social skills. It's a miasma of fairly unimpressive stuff. So if you're a senior executive recruiting people to your management team, I can't think of one politician you'd hire. Maybe I'd hire Gina Tighe after having become friends with him, but seriously, you know, they wouldn't pass the sniff test on a basic resume check. I'm going to be dead when this gets filmed.
As a family, we've always supported or agreed with people's right to choose. He said, you know, it might get a bit more involved and serious than you sort of think. And I said, well, so long as it's what he wants to do and he believes in it, I stand by him 100%.
So for any piece of legislation that goes before the Parliament, particularly controversial legislation, there needs to be a Senate committee process. And that committee process gives people the opportunity to put in submissions, to express their views about the legislation. At the end of the committee process, the Senate committee decides whether it wants to recommend that the Parliament passes a piece of legislation, whether it amends it, or whether it opposes it.
This proposed bill is targeted at people exactly like me, not a small percentage, as some people mention, nor an unlucky few, as others seem to talk about. You're looking at exactly who this bill is targeted at, and I hope that aids me in giving you some unique insights.
I have sat through debates on euthanasia bills in South Australia since 1995. There have been about 14 before the Parliament.
What if the painful condition, the suffering, is not temporary?
In a very, very small number of cases where the patient cannot be adequately relieved, they can be sedated.
So you're saying it's all right to sedate someone?
Well, it solves their problem, maybe not in a way they'd prefer, but it means that nobody has to die in pain.
When you say sedate, what do you mean?
Effectively put into a coma.
So you think it's humane, it's compassionate, and you have empathy to put someone in intolerable suffering into a coma
where they're no longer suffering, but not to directly
rather
kill
than
them.
To allow them to have the choice to have voluntary assisted euthanasia.
You're saying there is a right to die. I don't believe there is. We argue that in our submission.
Palliative care comes when you're a terminal person and you get given this. It's an emergency pack. There is enough drugs in there to kill me and probably one or two of you. And that's just sitting in my house. The issue is that I want to have a controlled process and in an environment where I know that it's going to be a magnificent death and a magnificent ending, not as you mentioned before, Senator, swallowing a whole lot of pills, hoping it works and spitting half of them back up.
Once you allow people to employ doctors to kill them, then you're opening the gates to, as I've explained, widespread community lowering of morale. That is the slippery slope argument.
The slippery slope argument is twofold. Basically, it says that once you create a law for assisted dying, there's no way of controlling it. And also it suggests that once you create that law, then what's to stop that law becoming wider and wider to include more and more people? You only have to look at the vast amount of peer-reviewed research from overseas, going back now almost 2 decades, to show that there has been no slippery slope. The numbers that use these laws in these countries have always been and remain statistically tiny. The amount of support for these laws in this country has always been and remains enormous, well in excess of 80%. Opposition, which is largely from very conservative religious groups, less than 10%.
Are your views faith-based today?
Well, I don't know that you can necessarily take your faith out of the way that you live your life.
As you would be aware, Catholic Health Australia is the largest non-government provider grouping of health, community and aged care services in Australia. It is CHA's view that Australia should, as a matter of priority, ensure that a humane, dignified alternative to euthanasia is always available, and therefore it should be no surprise that Catholic Health Australia's view is that it is never permissible to end a person's life through the action of euthanasia.
The Christians are all running on their own bullshit, and they've lived in it for so long, they're not doing the homework. You wouldn't be a senator listening to this shit for quids. The reality is if the country passes a legislation, sure you can have a constitutional challenge. Well, the next step will be change the fucking constitution.
This bill, if passed, by saying yes to easy suicide, validated by government, would unravel the good we are trying to do in Australia through national strategies to prevent suicide. Then there is the almost inevitable decline of palliative care services and funding as financial realities bite, as observed in other jurisdictions.
I decided to set up Medicine with Morality, which gave a definition of human life from fertilisation to life's natural end, and that all human life had intrinsic dignity in all states of dependency and disability. I'm not happy with physician-assisted suicide, just as I'm not happy with euthanasia. I just simply guarantee my patients that they will not die in pain or physical distress. And with that, the situation does not come up.
Many people in palliative care will say, I've never been asked by any of my patients ever to hasten death. All I can say to them is, well, they're not bloody well listening.
I have to say that I don't believe I've had anyone who's had a painful death. Certainly the people that I have looked after. So no, I do not have patients dying in pain.
So when people argue that all this pain can be taken care of or that palliative care is the answer, they are just wrong. Palliative care is not the answer, it's not the entire answer. And why do we know that? Because palliative care tells us that themselves. Their own statement is, even with optimal care, they cannot do with all pain and suffering at the end of life. And by their own statistics, which they collect every year from their 106 palliative care units around Australia, roughly 4% of their patients have what's called refractory symptoms, which means symptoms effectively which are out of control. The suffering that's on the other side of those, for those patients, is savage. Now, how many is 4% of palliative care's patients? Well, 17,000 people died in palliative care in Australia last year, so that's nearly 700 people every year dying in savage pain. They exist.
The number of suicides increased, the number of physician-assisted.
So what's the source of that?
From what I've read, I can't give you any specific references, but what I do know is that...
well, we do need specific references. This is a Senate committee. We need good, sound advice and information, and that's why we really need to know where your views and opinions are coming from. If they're just your own personal views, then that's one thing. But if you are saying that you're basing this on your experience and your evidence. Can you tell us exactly what that source of experience and evidence is?
And again, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to provide an exact reference, but we do know that it is extended to people with non-threatening illnesses, people who are blind, for instance, without.
Are you talking about the twins in Belgium?
Yes.
Mark and Eddie Verbessen were Belgian twins in their mid-40s who were born deaf, and they had a thing called Usher syndrome where they were gradually going blind with a series of associated ailments that went with that. And they applied for euthanasia under Belgian law, which allows for those with unbearable and untreatable suffering. For these boys who only communicated, who worked and lived together all their lives, who only communicated through sign language, going blind suddenly meant they were trapped in their own individual prisons for the rest of their lives.
Are you aware that in relation to those twins, they had other severe medical problems?
No.
The more reasonable response is couched in our national anthem. It says, "Australians all let us rejoice, for we are young and free." We're not free under current law when it comes to choice at end of life for terminally ill, partly due to religious dogma.
I believe that Christians have a very important role in society, and that we always have had, and Christians are at the beginning of the palliative care services. Christians were at the beginning of hospitals. We've always had a role in helping people in society, people who set up orphanages as Christians because they were compassionate and caring for society as part of what we do.
The bulk of opposition comes from people with deeply held religious view. It is a big part. You can't ignore it. And my response is always people should be entitled to have whatever view they like. If people have got strong faith, that's absolutely their right.
We decide that God has the choice as to when we die, and that is not a choice that we should take into our own hands.
I postulated that Christ's death could be viewed as a euthanasia in the sense that he's on the cross suffering grievously. You've no doubt that it's a terrible suffering death. And he cried out, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?" Who's he talking to? He's talking to his Father. "You're forsaking me, you're allowing me to suffer like this?" 2 verses later, he gave a big sigh and gave up the ghost. So what do you imply from that? Well, God had intervened to end his son's suffering. And I said, this is euthanasia. And at that point, before he died, he took a drink, and this was vinegar, it's supposed to be, but there are people who've argued, well, in fact, it was probably something more lethal than that. And he died suddenly. You don't die suddenly with the crucifixion. That upset a few Catholics, I can tell you.
I am a religious person, but we're not a religious organisation. And in fact, I wish some of the religions would do something more about it. Pathetic.
When people like the Archbishop of Sydney cleverly suggest that putting Granny out of her misery
so easily becomes putting Granny out of our misery.
That's a very, very clever line, but he knows that's not true. And if he doesn't know it, then he shouldn't say it.
I find it intolerable that some would use God as a reason to look me in the eye and say, "Peter, we insist that you, with your terminal illness and suffering, live your life to the natural end no matter what." It's unacceptable.
The Catholic Church, when I asked them, what is the difference between terminal sedation and providing someone with a script at the end of their life so that they can say goodbye to their family, they couldn't particularly answer that, except to say that one was killing and one was starving to death, basically. Lovely.
When I think we get into trouble is when they try and impose their views on other people. I'm not a religious person. If somebody has a religious point of view, it is absolutely their right. I just don't want their religious views to impact on my life. And that's really, I think, the line that needs to be drawn in a secular society. And I think we do need to fight very hard to make sure that church and government are very separate entities.
Do I believe that Christians have a role in politics? Absolutely, definitely, yes.
One of the human rights that we have is the right to life. And implicit in the right to life is our ability to lead our lives, but also our ability, if we choose, to end our lives.
It's all based on choice. Why are we trying to restrict it to, say, for example, terminal illness, last 6 months to live, or whatever the framework might be? I just don't think that's reasonable. If we're really talking about choice, then I think actually the perspective that Philip Nitschke takes is a more realistic one.
What I would like to see is an acknowledgement that accessing a peaceful death is every rational adult's human right, and seeing that reflected in some way. And my best way of seeing that reflected is to make sure that the access to the drugs which will give people this option becomes much more readily available to the elderly. Now that's a different way of dealing with the problem than trying to set up a piece of law which will set up the conditions under which each person can get access. The safeguards that have been introduced into these models are becoming so strict that it's almost going to be, the laws, if they should pass, are going to be almost unusable. And as I often say, you're going to have to be just about dead to qualify.
I think when you get Nitschke and others who are entering the field, I actually think some of his actions have made it harder to get to that landing place than others. So his intervention in so-called helping the young man in Western Australia who just wanted to end his life, that's an abuse of the system, in my opinion. And therefore, I think that's done a lot of damage.
Nigel Brayley was a situation where I became involved where effectively a man going to jail for 20 years decided to end his life. To my mind, that was a case of a person making a rational decision to die. I look at the websites of the various societies and they've got banners saying we have nothing to do with this person, and I was wondering, my ideas are so dangerous. The Medical Board of Australia used their emergency powers to effectively take my medical registration because I would consider to be a danger to the Australian public. Are these ideas so dangerous that we can't even have them discussed? I don't know. I would welcome a society where open and free discussion takes place about ideas.
And those who are opposing the concept of euthanasia under certain conditions looks at that abuse and said, well, there's a typical example of what can happen if a person wishes to abuse the process, if a family member wants to dispose of a parent. We've got to make sure that that's properly answered.
That argument about scaring the politicians is really the argument that the voluntary euthanasia dying with dignity societies use. If you start talking about the broader model and the really fundamental concept about who owns and who controls one's life, the fact that it scares politicians like Jeff Kennett doesn't surprise me at all. I get a little annoyed at being blamed for the fact that 20 attempts to pass laws around in the various state parliaments of Australia have failed. The idea that somehow or other I've been responsible for all those failures, I think those making that claim should look very closely at their own ability to lobby and to influence the political process and stop looking around for scapegoats.
Suicide is not a crime in this country or in many other countries. It's recognised that if somebody chooses deliberately to end their own life, that is an aspect of the right to life and one's ability to do with it what one chooses. Assisted suicide is a criminal offence, and it's a serious criminal offence. It carries a maximum penalty of 10 years imprisonment.
Many people just simply want the choice to be at home, to be surrounded by their family in their last days, and to make that active decision rather than that control being taken away from them.
He exhibits signs of greatness for a politician, seriously, because he's changed the game by taking it to a federal agenda and having this law passed at a federal level, even though there will be some constitutional challenges, is very, very important. Australians, 82% of you all say you support this law. Well, we've got Labor politicians, we've got Greens politicians, we've got Liberal politicians. They need to hear your voice stand up and say, well done, politicians, for coming together and doing something great for all Australians so we can live in a country that's not just great to live in, but it's great because you've got a choice of how you die in it.
Today we are discussing a highly sensitive subject that can divide public opinion.
We make choices every day, what we wear, eat, and where we work and live. But should we have a right to choose when we die? And if so, what are the consequences?
Now, Peter, 5 years ago, you were diagnosed with esophageal cancer. How are things for you now?
My esophageal cancer is metastasised into my lungs,
Right.
so what'll kill me is that. And I have trouble breathing, especially if I exert myself sitting here. But if Margaret gives me a run in the conversation, I'm liable to start coughing.
So we're going to go gentle on him, Margaret.
Yeah, that's right.
How did you come to campaign against euthanasia?
I became very involved, firstly, in the demands that were surfacing at the time to legalise abortion. Now, I realise we're not talking about abortion today, but the two things are related because we're talking about the taking of human life. Once you decide that there are some lives not worthy to be lived, unfortunately, it is a slippery slope. Once you legalise something and you give to a certain group in the community the power to kill others and to say it's going to be dying with dignity, I don't believe that's the case at all. When there was a debate in the federal parliament in 1966, 67 was in the Senate. Well, it was interesting to hear the speeches that were made.
We are living in the 21st century. It's all very well to talk about things 40, 50 years ago, but Margaret, grow up and move on. In terms of using emotive words like killable people and quoting a few stories, we can sit around and have some grandmother anecdotes, or we can deal with some facts.
You take Belgium, 50% of people who have had their lives ended didn't request it. The other thing is, the bottom line is, you have to ask yourself,
like to see the evidence
excuse
of that,
me,
Margaret.
Well, there
Please
is evidence.
send it to me after the show. If you've got 5 minutes of time at some stage, if you go into the Age, click through to the comments section, it's astounding when you just start reading through this stuff. I'd be in tears.
Yes, but they're inviting people to write in, etc., etc. Well, let me assure you, don't waste your breath, because the last time I wrote about this, the letter was cut down and most of the important parts left out. And, of course, they're running a campaign. They're not wanting to put any other arguments at all. They've been doing it for years. They were doing it back in 1994, 95, the Age.
Well, I won't be here to collect the bet, Margaret, but I'd give you a $100 bet Dina Tully's bill will go through because times are changing. We're heading towards the 22nd century, and the people of Australia cannot be ignored on this any longer. And there's too many people now picking it up, so it's coming out of the closets. Hi mate, how are you? So you know how you said Margaret Tighe was going to be a bit difficult to deal with? She really is a bit of a bloody old bitch, talking about stuff, 30, 40, 50 years old, but at the end of the day, I just chewed her up and spat her out. Yeah. The people were amazing. Afterwards, they came up and they were saying, well done, congratulations and stuff, because they saw her advocating positions that had no fact or substance and were just bullshit. And the fact that I just sort of called her on it, they obviously were all chomping at the bit, wanting to themselves.
Well, as I said, anybody who believes that if you legalise patient killing, all these things won't happen, well, you have to believe in fairies at the bottom of the garden. It's good that you've got such belief in human nature, but human nature being what it is.
Mr. Prime Minister, this is my Christmas message to you. I have about 76 days left to live. You have time on your side, at least 2 years left in government. I have been trying to get a meeting with you to talk about the importance of medical assistance and choice at end of life for the terminally ill and the incurably suffering. At the moment, I feel like I'm just stuck between a rock and a hard place. Please, Mr. Prime Minister, contact me with urgency. I've got a clock, a lethal clock that's going tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock.
Peter is becoming incredibly frustrated by the lack of response that he's getting from our Prime Minister, Tony Abbott. He's done just about everything apart from bury his bum in Burke Street to try and get his attention. He's written letters, he's appealed on TV and radio, he's done absolutely everything. Peter is the type of bloke that's used to getting his own way, so this is very, very foreign to him. But he's like a dog with a bone, and he won't stop until he speaks to Tony Abbott.
People with my complaint, which is called macular degeneration, and there's 160,000 odd Australians with it. They can get around and semi-fend for themselves, but it makes life extremely difficult because of not being able to read properly. But if you want to know why I don't particularly want to live any longer, it's not just that. The person I shared most of my life with, or for at least the last 60 years, died fairly suddenly, and I have no close relatives at all. I don't see any point in continuing because I have nothing to live for, and I'm more miserable than I care to say. I very much resent the religious right, who seems to think that suffering is desirable, so I do not understand why the politicians, except through fear, don't allow us the choice. I understand this current bill doesn't cater for persons in my position, but one has to start somewhere.
I think a healthy society is one where you allow people to make decisions, even the ones we don't like. The idea that you have to go off and seek permission to die. And that's the trouble with one of the legislative models, that you need to get permission from another body. It's no one else's business. If I decide to get rid of my life, that is my business. No one else's. No one else's. Certainly not a doctor's, or some doctors say, oh, you're not sick enough to die. My reaction to that is, I make this decision, not you.
Okay, thank you very much. Bye. Mark? Yes, that was. Can I take a call from the Prime Minister tomorrow at 1 o'clock?
Really?
People don't believe in me sometimes. I knew I'd finally get there. Australian politicians in the last few generations have lost the charismatic piece, which is what tends to be bread and butter for a politician. I don't think there's really any politicians in Australia that are exuding charisma. Peter Short speaking.
Oh, Peter, it's Tony Abbott here. I'm ringing you because I've got your letters, and I just thought I should give you a call and just to chat about the situation you find yourself in.
Well, thank you very much. How would you like me to do the call? Would you like me to give you a quick insight into my thoughts, or would you like to open up and I'll listen to you?
Well, look, Peter, why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself? And look, I'm sorry it's taken me a little while to make this call. I know it's not an excuse or a justification, so I'm sorry it's taken me a while to make the call.
I understand you and I have probably different philosophical bases around our religion and some of our primary beliefs. The really, and I'm rushing, but the really poignant point in learning for me in this journey has been it's not about the last week or two of my life, it's about the last 6 months, knowing that I have a choice and I am in control.
Yeah. When you say having that choice, Peter, what do you have that you don't think other people have?
So what I have is, because of the connections I've made with some doctors, I will have Nembutal made available to me if I am intolerably suffering. At the moment, it's an illegal act. I'm in no position to give a Prime Minister advice, but I can't understand why, as Prime Minister, you would not see the opportunity of letting this thing have a head of steam, get into the public debate, and once and for all in the 21st century, let's get this either put to the side or voted for. So that sort of is me in a nutshell, Prime Minister.
Sure. Well, Peter, look, never apologise for giving advice to the Prime Minister, because about 23 million people are full of advice for the Prime Minister. And look, The Di Natale bill, if there were to be a vote on the merits or otherwise of the Di Natale bill, that would be a free vote. So I certainly wouldn't for a moment try to insist upon the Liberal Party having a whipped vote.
Yeah.
If there were to be a vote on the Di Natale bill, almost certainly I would be voting against it.
Yep.
But if you were to ask me what my priorities for the Parliament are in the new year, it wouldn't be this.
Yep.
My understanding is that attempting suicide is illegal in most states. That's my understanding. I'm not a lawyer, but that's my understanding.
It's not illegal, strangely, for the person to kill themselves, but it's illegal for anyone to aid and abet them.
Right, I see. That's what it is. Okay. Can I ask you another question, Peter? I mean, this Nembutal, what does Nembutal do, if I may ask?
Nembutal is a drug which puts you to sleep in about 3 or 4 minutes. It just slows your body down completely and your heart stops.
So it wouldn't be illegal for you to take Nembutal, but it would be illegal for someone to supply you with Nembutal. Is that right?
Yes.
I think situations like this are often much better left to the judgment of individuals and their families, and if needs be their medical professionals, than closely regulated by black letter law. I can't imagine that anyone who you've been dealing with is going to be in any great trouble with the law. I would be very surprised as a bush lawyer if anyone were to be in any difficulty with the law in practice, if they were simply quietly doing what they thought was best for people and doing things at all times in accordance with the best instructions of the patient and the family. You know, some of these things, I often think that some areas are better left grey because if you try to be black and white about them, you can get yourself into difficulties.
You know, I just wonder to myself, would it be not better to, at the federal level, think this is a 21st century topic? It can't be left to the side, and maybe you take some leadership in, certainly not personally supporting it because you never will, but in terms of from a political spectrum point of view, saying the time has probably come to have this conversation and maybe get it into your parliamentary agenda.
Well, Peter, look, I'm happy to think about it. So, look, Peter, I'm going to have to sign off, I'm afraid.
Absolutely.
But look, I appreciate the chance to speak with you. You're a very passionate advocate, and I'm pleased that we've had this chat. And look, depending upon what the future holds for both of us and what may or may not exist in the hereafter, we might have another conversation.
You never know. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Cheerio. Bye.
Mr. Rabbit.
Half an hour.
It's pretty good.
Well done. He was quite clear without being offensive in where his position lies, and there was no surprises in that. And really, the goal was to say, if it came to Parliament, there'd be a free vote. I can quote him on that.
And that's really all, I mean, at the end of the day, that's all you wanted.
He felt that people taking action, the law would leave them alone.
Yeah, I heard that part, yeah.
So...
Can we'll keep the thing, and when Fluffy and I get arrested, we'll say, look, the Prime Minister said it would be okay.
I think situations like this are often much better left to the judgment of individuals and their families, and if needs be their medical professionals, than closely regulated by black letter law. I can't imagine that anyone who you've been dealing with is going to be in any great trouble with the law. I would be very surprised.
Well, isn't that interesting? Here's the chief lawmaker, if you like, in the whole country, the Prime Minister, the man who is involved in constructing our laws and who surely believes in the rule of law. It's the prime underpinning of democracy. And he's sort of saying, well, really, we can let doctors sort of do what they like. They can give people drugs. Really, it's got nothing to do with society. It's just a matter between the doctor and the patient. Well, there's other people who say that's very, very, very dangerous.
I think it's totally inappropriate for the Prime Minister to be saying that people who are presently breaking the law should be allowed to go on breaking the law, because that's really what it comes down to. It provides no comfort to either health professionals or family or the people who are seeking to end their own suffering.
You know, for millennia we've had laws prohibiting killing people. And you know, are we really about to change that? I defy anyone to really suggest that this is so clinical and clean that we can manage it. I don't believe we can.
Leslie here. I just feel so tired and so unable to do anything. I think it's most unfair that anybody should have to put up with such misery. It makes me so cross that the politicians with their various superstitions won't allow us to do this legally. The days drag by, that it seems to me a grave disservice for anybody to try to keep me alive. I have decided not to have this, because what's the point at 90 and feeling the way I do? So I've set things in motion to try to finish it.
Well, how quickly things change.
So Dad had a bit of a scare just then.
I was going to bed, my legs felt a bit tired and I was doing some stretches, and then I went to bed and dropped my pants and looked at my right leg and it looked a hell of a lot fatter than my left leg. So we went to Cabrini to emergency and we spent the last couple of hours there. I've got blood clots in my groin. I now have to take blood thinners for the next 3 months. It was a bit scary, but you know, this is the journey I'm on. You know, maybe this thing's not going to go to script. And Mitchell and I were just having a laugh then, because we all sort of rushed out of here in a bit of a hurry. And I said, if something had gone terribly wrong, I hadn't even given him a hug.
But that was sort of the first real oh shit moment, I suppose, that we've had. And it was quite nerve-wracking. So you just sort of start thinking of when he left, I sort of didn't want to scare him, so I didn't give him a hug or say goodbye, because I wanted you to sort of be like, he'll be fine, he'll be back in an hour or two. And as soon as he left, I sort of thought, oh, probably should have given him a hug just in case.
So we've just got a new plan. If we rush off to emergency again, we'll do a hug just in case.
It starts to make it all a bit more real now. Yeah.
Unfortunately, the news isn't great.
No, I didn't think it would be.
The cancer has definitely got a bit worse.
I knew you were going to say that. You didn't have your normal, really deadpan face on. You had a slight, sad face.
So what does that mean?
Well, I'll show you. I'll show the pictures. It's probably the best way to illustrate it. But here's your X-rays, and all of that white stuff.
That's why I had trouble breathing. Shit, eh?
The cancer has got into all the lymphatic vessels in your lungs. There's a bit of fluid at the bottom of the right lung.
So I've really got a heavy dose of lung cancer.
But you haven't told us anything that we didn't suspect anyway. So get lulled into a little bit of a false sense of security, or, you know, we have a little bit because Peter's been so well. But then, you know, you get a good smack in the face with this sort of thing.
But I've learned a lot from you.
Yeah.
I've really valued your relationship. I think I will never forget you, no matter what happens. And I think you have approached this in a really, really meaningful and admirable way. And I think you will leave a profound legacy. And I just want to say I feel privileged to have been part of it and to have known and to be able to work with both of you.
Make me cry. I don't often cry. Very rarely do I cry, and I hope
Well, I think it's my job, the layers of my job are just, you meet some extraordinary people.
You would.
Extraordinary people who I just find absolutely inspiring. I've got a lot of faith like that, and you are certainly one of them, Peter.
No, thank
I
you.
find you absolutely inspiring.
Okay, so Peter, you've got a clear picture of where you're heading. You know it's going to get tougher, and you've indicated to me that you would like to have control over the end of your life. You understand the alternatives, the palliative care alternative, and I now want to illustrate that I'm not pulling your leg. That's a dose of medication that will give you complete control of your life. It'll give you the ability to have a secure or safe, reliable end of your life. It will make that it's serene and dignified. I've been present on a number of occasions when this has happened. It's one of the most, well, if you could call death beautiful, that's a beautiful death, a good death. Peter, that medication you will have to take yourself. I regard that as your responsibility. It's your decision. My responsibility is to make sure that you can do that in a safe, secure, humane way.
So, obviously I swallow it.
Yep.
Is there anything else I should do?
Well, you need to take a little bit of antiemetic, something to stop the possibility of vomiting. But apart from that, there's nothing much else you need to do. You will take it, you'll be talking to your family, and then you'll give a big sigh, big yawn. Appear to be asleep, but they can wake you up and talk to you, and then you just slowly ebb away.
They can wake me up and talk to me?
Yeah, for a short period, very short period.
I don't think I'd want to be woken
No, I
up.
don't think I'd want to wake you up.
Come back.
Okay. Elizabeth and Mitchell will be left with a memory of you that is extremely positive, and their grief will be profoundly diminished because of the way you've died and the way you've shared your death with them.
The fact that Peter's in the situation that he will have a choice at the end of his life, whether he chooses to avail himself of medication and end his own life, or whether he chooses to just go with the flow, that's entirely up to him, but that's what it boils down to. It's his control, his decision. That's what it's all about. And that is a massive, massive gift. Yeah, massive gift.
A couple of days ago, had a really bad night. And so, in the morning, we went to emergency and stayed in emergency all day. And they ran a whole series of tests, and I had pneumonia. I'm absolutely exhausted.
So here's Missy, Cocker Spaniel, and here's Petey eating Gyoza, and here I am holding the camera. How's everyone feeling?
He's absolutely vile. He's vile. He's vile to me. Yeah, he's not too bad to anyone else, but he's vile to me. But, yesterday he was really good. He was, he was chipper. He was up there. He was happy. He was enjoying. Today he hasn't enjoyed one single moment. He's just got to just give it a bit more and see if you can find that spot again. Last night was a bad night again. So we went to palliative care, which he was happy to do. He feels safe, he feels secure, and so then we had more discussions, and he actually said, I would be happy to die here. And so then we talked some more, and he said the focus on now coming home was not the main goal. And he fought so hard for the Neanderthal that I think he was almost apprehensive not to do it. But the whole point is that he has lived his life to the absolute fullest and he has made a choice. That's his choice. And that's what this whole debate and this whole nightmare has been about.
So Mrs. been acting really weird. As of yesterday after we took Dad into palliative care. And she's just been running around, not really settled. So people who say animals can't tell when something's wrong, they can tell when something's wrong.
We brought up a magnificent son. He is going to be a stalwart for himself and you through this. You do to save me. I could never have had a life with the two of you that we did. And you're cracking up. But seriously, I want a fucking life lottery. So, hey.
It's all become very real very quickly. So there's no longer, you can look at Pete and use him as your sort of position of strength and go, if he's all right, I'm all right. Now it's really down to the nitty gritty of it all. It's getting a lot harder.
So this is why we need Richard Di Natale's bill. His medication has increased because he was having breakthrough bouts of very severe and distressing coughing. And so he may linger another 24 hours, another 48 hours. But why? Why is he lingering another 24 or 48 hours? Bye, my darling.
When I reflect on all of the things that have gone on over the last 57 years, I consider myself very lucky. You do get more out of every little thing, knowing that you're not going to be around here for so long. Every time I pat my dog, I just get more joy out of it. The colours in the trees are just astounding. Yes, you see them every year, and yes, they're pretty, but they're pretty in a way that I think you can only appreciate if you are in the background saying to yourself, you may never see that again.
I think if we pass laws around dying with dignity, Peter Short will be remembered as part of the reason that we've been able to do it. I think the courage that he showed through his journey is part of the reason that we're here today and debating these laws at a national level. Certainly at a very personal level. Meeting Peter was one of the reasons that I decided I would take this legislation to the federal parliament. And I think if we can get this over the line, it'll be in large part thanks to Peter Short.
I mean, the passion that he had and the importance and the urgency of his campaign, it certainly moved Dying with Dignity up my list of to-do things. And in fact, on the day that I was officially elected, that was the first policy that I announced that would be my main focus initially in Parliament.
I think law reform is going to be very difficult. People say to me it's inevitable in Australia because there's a growing demand for it. But as we've seen in the last 20 years, demand and political action don't go together. The people that oppose law reform in Australia are the same people that successfully rolled it 20 years ago. They have deep pockets, they're well connected, they operate out of the public eye in the back rooms of our political parties. Don't underestimate for a second their ability and willingness to influence this debate to suit their moral view and to distort and deny the public will.